Hello and welcome to Sensei podcast. This is Manos Brilakis discussing with leaders in the field of CTO and complex PCI. Sensei means teacher or master in Japanese. The goal of the Sensei podcast is to help you learn and improve in CTO and complex PCI so that you can become the best that you can be and offer your patients the best possible results. Hello and welcome to Sensei Podcast. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jason Wollmuth, who is the Director of Complex Coronary Interventions in the Providence Hospital in Portland, Oregon, and amazing CT operator and good friend for many years. So Jason, welcome to Sensei Podcast.
Manos, it's so glad to join you. It's so glad to chat with a good friend that I've gotten to know over the years who's taught me a lot.
No, same here. And again, thank you so much. And I'm very excited actually to learn from you how your journey was. You know, everyone is a little different in how they learn to do the complex CTO work. And clearly you've done it in an exceptional way. But how did it start for you? What was the beginning, the motivation to get in that area?
Well, yeah, it goes back quite a ways for me now. I've been doing hybrid CTO now for about 10 and a half years. So it started back in 2012. I was at a previous institution in a smaller town in Oregon called Bend, and one of my reps, the Boston Scientific rep that I had gotten to know quite well over my time, had just started teaching or working with a guy in a neighboring town who was learning CTOs, and he said, Jason, you got to go see this. You got to see what they're doing. This is right up your alley. You'll love it. And he kind of pushed me a couple times, and so finally one day I did, and I went and saw what they were doing. And so, and you know, it was one of those things. I'm sure this happened to you the first time you saw a hybrid CTO. I think I had to pick my jaw off the floor because it's like everything that I'd ever thought was a rule in interventional cardiology was kind of being thrown out the window, and to see the outcomes that these guys were getting, and I knew right there that it was something I wanted to be a part of. And so it actually started with that, and that was kind of my first introduction, was just kind of seeing some cases being done, and then it led to me learning how to do these cases with a couple of colleagues. And so when I started, a guy who's become a very good friend of mine, Steve Cook, had just started learning how to do CTOs in a town a couple hours from where I was working in Eugene, and he worked in the same hospital system as the system that Dr. Bill Lombardi was working at, Peace Health. And so Bill had started trying to train some other doctors within their health system in how to do CTO PCIs, and one of them was Steve. And so he had started working with Steve, I think in early 2012, and that's kind of where my rep started working with them, and that's how I got involved. And so I ended up, instead of trying to like do these on my own, I decided that, you know, for a while at least, what I do is refer my patients over to Steve and Eugene. And so what we do is about once a month, I would go over to Eugene and have patients come over with me, and I got privileges to do cases, to scrub cases with Steve. And so it was usually Steve and I, you know, for a day or two, doing anywhere between, you know, 6 and sometimes 8 CTOs over a day or two period. And usually Bill was just in the back control room yelling at us, telling us to push harder or stop being such a wuss or whatever. But it was an awesome way to learn because you know, Steve had you know, probably 6 to 8 months of a head start on me. So he had really made a tremendous amount of progress and was really pretty comfortable. And then we had Bill, who had, you know, obviously years of experience, was a leader in the field at that point, which was still relatively young, kind of guiding me along the way. And so I got the best of both worlds. I had the best teachers there, but I also I was able to do it hands on. So I was really kind of doing everything or most of it. And when something didn't feel right or I wasn't sure if it was right, then I had, two other experts who could jump in and kind of help me out. And so for me, I think it was the best way to learn. I know over the years we've as operators who are trying to teach others how to do these procedures, we've tried a lot of different things, and I think we've learned a little bit about what works and maybe what doesn't work as well. But for me, that was a great way to learn because I was able to do these cases with two other expert operators. And really kind of build up my skill set, most importantly, but then also my confidence. And so I didn't do a CTO at my institution for about a year. I think I went over to Eugene for about a year to year and a half. And then I started kind of doing more of the low JCTO scores cases on my own at my institution and kind of save the more challenging cases to bring over to Eugene. And then we kind of gradually started doing more complex CTOs at my institution. And it was a great way to kind of not only learn, build my confidence, but a great way to bring it to my lab because my colleagues in the town could see the results that we were getting. We were able to have really good success that I wouldn't have had if I was just trying them on my own. But we also, the cath lab staff where I was working, when I started introducing it to them, they only saw kind of successful cases initially. So there wasn't this negative stigma across the lab about CTOs and what we were doing. So I think for me, it was a great way to learn.
No, phenomenal way. And, I think you're the first person I talked to who had double proctoring, so to speak. You work with two people simultaneously. Most people have someone go to their lab or they go to their lab, but having this arrangement is amazing. And clearly worked out extremely well in your case.
Yeah, it worked out great. And I've actually, because I've done proctoring as I know you have, and I've always encouraged people that I train with to get to know kind of a network of physicians in their area that do this, or at least one that they can learn from and maybe even get privileges at their hospital and scrub with them. Because again, I think it's one thing to hear somebody tell you to do something. It's another thing to feel it when you're doing the maneuver or the procedure, and then have somebody that can kind of like help out and touch it, feel a wire, feel how it feels, and to kind of give you that verbal and then tactile feedback as well. So it's something certainly that I've encouraged people that are learning how to do CTOs to do. I think there are better ways to learn now. I mean, obviously there's CTO CHIP fellowships. I know you guys have run one now for 4 or 5 years, probably at least. I think that's probably, if I were a young interventionalist and I was interested in this, that's how I would approach it probably now, because I think that's the best, most reproducible way to get somebody kind of up to speed. But short of that, if you don't have the luxury of being able to do that, then I think, having a mentor that you can work with and scrub cases with, and that you can do over a period of, a year or more is probably the next best way to do it. And I'm curious on your opinions on it too, but No,
absolutely. And to be honest, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Having the chance to work for a year is the best. With someone who is experienced in the field is the best. Actually, we have our current fellow who was in practice for 5 years, and he took a sabbatical to come work with us for a year and then go back. And, obviously he's already a very established operator, and now he's working mainly on the refinement, the high technique. So I think this works great, but for most people, this may not be realistic, as you said, because of work arrangements, or they've been in practice and it's hard to go back. And in that way, I think proctoring works great, as you just mentioned.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to hear the story of your current CHIP fellow that he or she was able to kind of step away and dedicate themselves to do this. And And I remember, Bill, obviously I've learned lots of pearls of wisdom over the years from Bill and others, but Bill always mentioned, early on, like, if you're going to do this, you're giving something up. You got to give something up to be able to do this. And whether that's time with family, whether it's professional responsibilities or other procedures, you got to give something up. And your colleague who's working with you now, obviously, he gave up a lot to walk away from practice for a year and lose salary for a year. And that, that's not something everybody can do. But I think it kind of speaks to the fact that if you're going to dedicate yourself to try to do this and do it at a high level, there's something you're going to give up.
Yeah, and you're right. And it's a commitment and a sacrifice at the same time. Does it set you up very well for future success? Absolutely as well. So it is a give and take, but I agree with you. It's a tough step to take. But how has been your institution support? As you mentioned, you were in a way nice. You did it very nicely that you were already getting your experience elsewhere. So you brought the cases at a high level. You're able to get very success. But were they supportive? Were they, helping you out to build the program?
Well, I think there's several groups that need to be supportive in building a program. Probably the first and foremost is your partners and your colleagues, and so I think that was relatively easy to get their support for, mostly because they had patients that they were dealing with that they weren't able to help, and so when they saw that there was an opportunity for us to be able to help these folks to relieve their angina. And they see, some successful cases, then they buy in real quickly. So that was pretty easy. I think from an administrative level, I think there's a lot of concern over cost and fear of that. And, when I started doing CTOs and when I was going to start doing them at my institution, all of a sudden I'm asking for, 20, 30, 40 new pieces of equipment that they didn't have. And I remember they were supportive, but they also were kind of wanting to see proof that this was going to be financially feasible. And so actually my first year, the cath lab director kind of tallied a running cost of my cases versus, the reimbursement that they were getting from insurance, et cetera. And my first year at my institution, it was a break even. And so I think that gave them a lot of reassurance that they weren't like dumping a lot of money into a program that was not going to be successful. And, he was just looking at the financials of cost of equipment, lab time versus reimbursement. But I think when you can throw in the fact that, hey, you're potentially lowering the long-term costs of patient care, repeat stress tests, repeat angiograms, repeat hospitalizations for angina, and then the personal cost to the patients, then I think it was pretty easy for them to buy into it. So I never really got a lot of pushback from my institution partially because of the way I did it. I took a lot of these cases away and I wasn't having a lot of failures at my original institution. And then my second job, when I moved to Portland, I kind of was recruited to be a guy that was going to bring this or add to the program that had already been established where I was going. And so I had buy-in right away from our administration because they knew what kind of procedures I did, and they knew what I was going to be bringing. And I remember we had a cath lab, a meeting of all the interventionalists at where I'm at now, and they threw up a graph of kind of the where each physician was like a bubble on the graph, and the bigger your bubble was the number of cases you were doing, and then they had you on your cost per case, and there was kind of 7 different bubbles over here, and then there's this one big outlying bubble that was much more expensive. And I'm like, oh God, I'm gonna hear about that because my cost per case was considerably different, and
Sure.
And they never said anything to me about it. They never gave me a hard time about it, and I think they realized that there's value in doing these procedures because we're helping patients, we're building a program, bringing in outside referrals. So even though the case costs more, there's value to it. And so they've been very, very supportive of us in what we've tried to do. And I'm very, very thankful for that, because I know that's not necessarily the case for all of our colleagues.
Yes, it is not. And I guess, we always emphasize the importance of a welcoming environment for doing these cases. But now that you've done them for a long time and you're very experienced and great results, are things getting easier right now? Are you not stressed? Are you relaxed going in the case? No problem. Are you stressed before the case? How do you approach them at this stage that you're an established operator with a lot of experience?
I would say the majority of cases, I'm not too stressed going into the case, but there are definitely some cases where I am. And the cases where I'm more stressed about going into it, and again, part of this is just with experience, is cases where I'm worried that they're not going to tolerate things well. The things we need to do to fix a case or fix an artery, I worry that they're not going to tolerate well. I did a case probably 2 or 3 months ago, and it was a right CTO in a guy who was living off of a lima to the LAD. So his circ was occluded, his left main was occluded, his LAD was occluded, and his right was occluded. And he had normal LV function, but he was living off a lima to his LAD that was then collateralizing the circ in the right. And the lima was very tortuous. And he didn't really have a great ADR option, but he had a great retrograde option, but I knew I was going to have to go down the IMA to do that. And so the initial plan was I was going to try to do a dissection reentry. And I told him beforehand and had a discussion with him beforehand that, if we need to go retrograde, I'm going to have to go down that graft, and you may not tolerate it. And if you don't tolerate it, I may need to stop. And so sure enough, that's what happened. I couldn't get in antegrade. And I'm like, well, let's just run down the graft and see how he does. And, threw a microcatheter, got a wire across the septal relatively quickly, took a microcatheter around it, and he started having a lot of ST depression, his blood pressure tanked, and so we had to pull everything out. And so, we were able to kind of have the discussion, and we brought him back, and I did it with hemodynamic support, and he did great. He tolerated it just fine, and he got a really nice result. But those are the cases nowadays that worry me. The ones that I know they're going to be symptomatic when we're doing it, and that they're going to potentially have hemodynamic compromises. Those are the ones that kind of make me the most nervous. The other ones that make me nervous are the ones where either A, we have very limited options, or I have one option, but I know it's a high risk option. A really challenging epicardial collateral, or a patient that maybe has an old occluded vein graft, and I know I only get one chance at using it. Those are the ones that kind of make me a little more nervous. I would say the other ones that make me nervous are the ones that are, rock piles of calcium, because that and for a long day, even if you have options, that it's just gonna, every step along the way is going to be a bit of a challenge. So some of them still make me nervous, but I think the ones that you look at that you're like, hey, I've got a lot of good options, and those don't make me nervous at all anymore. It's the ones where I've got very limited options, and those options are going to make them sick. Those are the ones that kind of get me a little anxious and get me looking over the films again and again and again, and trying to think, well, can I find other options? So those are the ones that I think about most.
Perfect. And then, even let's say you do this case, and obviously complications will happen. So how do you handle complications? Have you matured now in terms of handling them effectively? Did they still depress you? How does that feel when this happens?
Yeah, they do affect me. I mean, I don't think they ever will not affect me. And maybe if they stop affecting me, maybe that's the time I need to stop doing it. I guess I'm a little better at managing complications now. Partially because I've had a lot of them, over the years. You can't avoid it when you're doing CTO PCI, but also because of what I do in our lab. I do all the CTOs, a majority of the CTOs. I do a majority of the really complex stuff, I'm also the guy that everybody calls when they're having a complication too. And I have an awesome group of interventionalists that I work with who are incredibly diverse and talented, but we all get into trouble. And so to be able to be that person, that mentor to help other colleagues when they have a complication, to kind of walk them through it, to scrub in and help it with them, it just makes you better at dealing with these complications. And having dealt with a whole host of complications over the years, it still bothers you and it still affects you, but I think you get better at managing them, and you get better at avoiding more catastrophic complications, because you're better at managing things up front, or at least anticipating things up front. I remember doing a case recently, and I can't remember all the details of it, but there was some step along the way where I'm like, this could go very, very bad. And I remember telling everybody in the room, hey, something could happen with this, and making sure everybody was aware. We had the nurse had drugs ready. We had all our perforation equipment in the room and everything. And everything worked out just fine. But that's something I know now that maybe I didn't know 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. I wouldn't have anticipated that step was fraught with risk. And so I think you get better at anticipating complications to try to avoid them, and you get better at managing them. And so that makes it easier. But I guess the one big thing that I've learned is if you have a complication, own it, fix it, and help the patient get through it. I think there's this natural tendency for us, when something's not good, something's not right, or there's a problem. It's like Dwayne Pinto says, you go through the 5 stages of grief right there with your complication, and one of them is denial. Like, you just want to it's gonna be all right. Well, you kind of, I guess I've kind of learned to don't deny it. Don't just expect everything's going to go well and turn out okay, and don't leave the hospital until you know that patient's out of the woods. Don't let the patient leave the cath lab until you know they're out of the woods. And those are things that you kind of learn, over the years. From an emotional standpoint, it's a tough thing to deal with still. I remember talking to a very, very experienced colleague who was dealing with some depression over this, because oftentimes us as CTO operators, we get case after case after case that are just disasters, and after a while you're just like, God, can I just get a type A lesion once in a while? But there is that emotional, it can be emotionally draining. And so I think having it's kind of where I rely on, friends and family and colleagues, but particularly colleagues who are in the space, who sometimes you can just kind of vent to, or it can be really, really therapeutic in a way.
And then, Jason, you've been one of the pioneers in educating through Twitter. I think your initial Twitter of the single access Impella has really made the tour around the world and has really changed our practice tremendously. So how do you use social media now? Do you think they're useful? Do you use them daily? How useful do you think they are for someone trying to learn these procedures?
I think it's a great way to kind of pick up tips and tricks. Somebody will post a case where they do something kind of unique. And you can kind of add that to your repertoire, to your algorithm when you're stuck at a particular spot. And so I think that's really where I get the most out of Twitter. I don't like when Twitter and all social media, there are pluses, but there are also a lot of negatives. And when people start, making things personal or attacking other people, that's where I just try to walk away from it. But I love social media for, learning, little tips and tricks. And, I think back to when I started on Twitter, one of the things that had been doing is on my phone. I kind of had a list of, problems that we run into in steps of procedures. Whether it's penetrating through a proximal cap to getting gear through a proximal cap to getting gear retrograde, whatever. And there was always kind of this list of troubleshooting things that you did, or kind of an algorithm of what you do next. And I feel like social media has helped to grow those where, I kind of had 2 or 3 things on my list, but, Manos, you did this on this case, so I add that to the list. All right, see, Wyman adds something to the list, So over the years, you kind of pick up a thing or two, and I think that's really where social media has its benefit because, we can all look towards, conferences or to publications on trials and studies and things like that. But it's the little things that kind of help us get through the procedure that can be disseminated much more widely and quickly via social media, as opposed to an obscure kind of procedural article that ends up in a journal that maybe isn't seen by a significant number of operators, and it can be seen across the world instantaneously. So I think it's a great forum for it. And it's something that, I wouldn't say I'm very active on social media, but I lurk a lot on social media. I don't post a lot, but I lurk a lot.
Perfect. And then when someone comes to you and says, listen, Jason, I want to learn to do CTO PCI, is there something that you use to decide this could be a good one or a bad operator? It gets you excited to teach them or not?
Well, I think if unless you're starting with a fellowship, which I think is a very different process than somebody that's in practice trying to learn it, you need to have several things. You need to have patient volume. I mean, if you're doing 75 PCIs a year, you're not going to be a CTO operator. It's just not going to happen. So there has to be a volume there. And then I think people have to have a good basic skill set. They need to know, different wires and microcatheters and how to use them. They need to know how to, pick and manipulate and guide catheters. They need how to have good use of, know how to use guide extenders. They have to have a good fundamentals of intracoronary imaging, intracoronary vessel prep, whether it's atherectomy, shockwave, laser, et cetera. And then I think people have to be good at bifurcations. Those are things that, if you're going to do CTOs, you got to be fairly well versed in those things. And so if you're doing a low volume to begin with, you may not have that degree of breadth of experience with some of these ancillary things that we use. So I think having a good volume and having a good kind of working knowledge on some of these other ancillary devices that we use and techniques that we use that are not necessarily CTO related is a really, really good place to start. And then I think, like we talked about earlier, there you have to have some buy-in from your colleagues. It's one thing to set up a CTO program and nobody sends you any cases, because you're going to be reliant on other people to see and evaluate these patients and refer them. You need to have buy-in from your administration as well. But then I think there's a mindset that people have to have. They need to, you need to be all in. You need to be passionate about it. You can't just say, well, I'm just going to do antegrade wire escalation. Well, okay, you can do that, but you're still not going to get 50, 60% of the CTOs that you see if you do that. And so you got to be all in. I think there's, you have to have some humility. You got to be humble to say, I'm not good at this. I don't know what I'm doing with this. I need to learn from somebody. And there are some really, really good operators across this country who don't have the humility to be able to say, I don't know this. I'm not good at it. I need to bring people in who can teach me. And so those people are not going to be CTO operators. And then I think it takes a lot of courage too, because you're signing up for a procedure that's really long and hard. You're going to expose yourself to failure. you're going to expose your patients to potential complications, because these all carry some degree of complications, even the best of hands. And so it takes a lot of courage to do that, humility and courage to jump into the pool. So I think there's the technical things, the things you can learn, right? You can learn how to manipulate wires and microcatheters and stuff like that. You definitely want to have that when you're starting it, but there's definitely a mindset that you have to be able to kind of progress and to get better and to help these patients.
So you think it's the hands, the dexterity you have in your hands, or the mindset that's more important?
I would probably say more the mindset. It's how you think through problems, how you can kind of be thinking, 2 or 3 or 4 steps ahead while doing something else. It's the anticipating of problems. It's the sense when you hit a roadblock, to be able to quickly think, okay, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try that. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to go back to the first one, and having that kind of internal algorithm in your head and being able to work through and process things very quickly. So I think a lot of it's more mental. I mean, there's certainly some touch and feel and things where, antegrade wire escalation in my hands may be different than antegrade wire escalation in yours or the next person's. And so, but it's more the mindset of problem solving and moving quickly when you're stuck, and not getting stuck in one area too long, because you're going to get stuck someplace else. So if you spend a lot of time at one spot being stuck, you're gonna struggle getting through a procedure. So I would definitely say the mindset is a bigger issue than the hands.
And then, is that the innate talent? So if people have the natural tendency for this, or is something that you grow through practice? What do you think?
I think there's probably a little bit of both. I think there are certainly, when you watch other people doing a CTO procedure, you can kind of see how quickly they think and they move from one thing to another. They try something a few times, it's not working, they switch their wire tape shape, their microcatheter, whatever. So I think there's some of it's just kind of innate. But I also think it's a practice too. Like it's studying and learning, algorithms for the places where you get stuck. And so, I had on my, like I said, when I was starting out, I kind of started building these lists, and I would leave them on my phone, and I'd get stuck, and I'd be pulling up my phone and having them try to log onto my phone and bring up a list. But nowadays, I think the majority of that's kind of more in my head, because I've been through it enough. And when you do these procedures, they translate obviously to non-CTO procedures as well. And so it's like anything, the more you practice something, the more innate it becomes. I remember hearing a lecture from Jamie McCabe recently, and he was talking about how you process and think through procedures. And I think he called it, there was level 1 thinking and level 2 thinking. And level 1 thinking is the stuff that's automatic, that just happens and you're not even thinking about it. And then there's the other stuff where you have to think about each step. And I think with CTO PCI, the more steps and things involved in the procedure that you can take from level 2 thinking to level 1 thinking, where it's just innate, makes you much more efficient in those procedures. I may be wrong on the level 1, level 2 thinking exactly what it is.
Sure.
But I remember it really struck me that, like, hey, that's one of the things that makes people better at CTO PCI is a lot of the stuff, they don't even think about it anymore. It's rote. And so I think some of it is innate, that you just have the ability to process things that quickly, but some of it is practiced. I remember reading about the 10,000 hour rule from Gladwell's book. The more you do it, and if you reach that critical point where you've done a certain enough, that it just becomes kind of innate and easier to do.
Absolutely. So how do you keep yourself in good shape to do all this? Do you exercise? Do you meditate? What do you do to keep able to perform at this high level?
I don't meditate. I don't journal. I don't do any of that. I do exercise, and one of the things that has become a challenge for me over the last few years has been the physical demands of doing a CTO PCIs. Wearing lead, being bent over a patient for sometimes hours at a time. I got to the point where I was really struggling a little bit with back pain and knee pain, hip pain, et cetera. And so I started doing some more physical therapy and some exercises to help that. And that did help, but probably the biggest thing that's been an impact for me recently is getting Rampart, where I'm not wearing lead. And that's really kind of changed things. But I think, a lot of my younger colleagues, when we got to Rampart, they're like, yeah, it's kind of big and clunky and it's kind of a bit of a pain. And I'm like, I get that because I was that way 10 years ago. But, just think about your body now because, you don't want to get to the point where it's too late. I don't think I got to the point where it was too late, where I'm getting, back surgeries and knee replacements, et cetera, like some of our colleagues have had. But I think, trying to stay physically fit is obviously helpful if you're going to do these long procedures. We oftentimes think of the mental aspects of these procedures, but there definitely is a physical component to it as well. And I think I've kind of definitely appreciated that more over the last few years. And then I think from the mental aspect of it, just having, a good outlet that when you leave work, you can kind of have people that either understand kind of what you're going through or can kind of pull you back away from that so you can try to leave work as work and home life as home life.
So what's exciting for you right now? You've done a lot of work. What is the thing that is most exciting at this time?
I think the things that excite me most in our field, well, I'll be honest with you, I'm still excited by doing CTOs. They're still the most fun thing I do. I've done a lot of work over the last, 4 or 5 years on, more complex PCI, not necessarily CTO, but, hemodynamically supported PCI. And I really love those cases. But I still love my days where I come in and I have 3 CTOs on board. That's still my favorite day. And now that I can do it with a Rampart, so I'm not wearing lead that whole day, it makes it even better. CTO PCI, it's, I'll be honest with you, this may sound kind of silly, but it's like a drug. It really is. And I think there is a rush when you get that wire crossed, or, I don't take many pictures when I'm doing PCIs anymore, but that last picture when you've ballooned it, you've stented it, you've done all your imaging pre and post, and so it's going to be good, and you get take that last picture, that rush that you get when everybody in the room goes, "Oh my God," are so excited, and yeah, I mean that's what excites me, is that feeling that you've taken a patient who's been struggling, has been symptomatic, they're limited. Sometimes they're desperate, not always, but sometimes they are. They're that limited, and to have that rush, that hey, we did it, we fixed it. Our team was able to get you through this. We were able to get a good result, and to be able to go back to the patient and their family and say, yeah, we got it done, and just to be excited for them that, I think, she's going to feel a whole lot better. He's going to feel great. He's going to be able to do some of these things that he hasn't been able to do. There's still other things we need to do. We need to get, medical therapy. We need to get them in physical therapy. We need to do rehab. But I think we're turning a corner. To be able to go out and talk to families about that and to have that gratification, it's the thing that excites me the most professionally.
How about a favorite book? You have a favorite book or a favorite movie?
I've got 2. My favorite 2 movies are Shawshank Redemption. I'm sure most people have seen that. I mean, it's just a great story. I love stories of people overcoming things and, hope and stuff like that. And then the other one is The Usual Suspects, which was just I still to this day remember watching it with my wife, and at the end of the movie, just like when all of a sudden this big reveal happens, and you're like, oh my God, what just happened? And you're thinking back through this movie, and you got like, I can't wait to watch it again to figure it all out. So The Usual Suspects, it was with Kevin Spacey and Benicio del Toro, and one of the Baldwin brothers was in it, and I'm trying to remember who else. Anyway, it's just a phenomenal story. So that's my favorite. Those are my favorite movies. My favorite books. The two that come to mind are The Road by Cormac McCarthy. It's kind of a dystopian story about this father and his son in trying to make their way down the road in this and kind of when the world has kind of had this catastrophic event. I love Cormac McCarthy novels. And then the other one was a one called Touching the Void. It was a mountaineering book. It was about this guy, I think his name's Joe Simpson was the author. He and his buddy go climbing up this mountain. I think it was in South America. And they have an accident. And his buddy dies. And he shatters his legs. And he gets off the mountain. Yeah, it's just a phenomenal story of survival. And those kind of books, was the Unbroken, the one by Laura Hildebrand about the Navy pilot who survived just unimaginable setbacks and plane crashes and the concentration camps and all this. And, those kind of stories just really resonate with me. I can read them over and over again. So those are some of the books that are my favorites.
Well, I think that explains your passion for CTO-PCI, because in many ways, this is the root of CTO-PCI.
It's all about survival, I guess, yeah.
Survival, overcoming adversity. I see there's a common link there.
There you go.
Which makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So what are you most proud of in medicine or outside medicine?
Outside of medicine, I think the thing that I'm most proud of is my kids. They're just really neat people.
How many do you have?
I have three daughters. So one of them is a junior in college, one's a senior in high school, and one's a freshman in high school. And they're the thing that bring me joy in life is my wife and my kids. And so they're probably the thing I'm most proud of. Everything they do, their ups and downs and their challenges, that's what, to me, life is worth living for is my kids. And so they're the thing I'm most proud of outside of medicine. In medicine, I'm really proud of the group I work with. I work with 6 other interventionalists and really talented people, diverse people. They have the skill sets that we bring, I think, are really unique. And we've really worked to kind of develop this program and the culture within the program. And we kind of continually strive to be better. I just read an email today about some of the things that we're not doing well, and so we're going to try to work to get better at it. And so I think in medicine, my practice and my group really gives me a source of pride. Some of that's what I bring to the group, but the majority of it's what everybody else has brought to it, because it's a group of individuals. And then I'm proud of where what I've been able to do, in helping patients, learning, which obviously it's a never-ending thing when you're talking about CTO PCI or complex PCI, but learning and continuing to try to push myself to get better every year, recognize what I'm not good at and trying to figure out ways to get better. And the fact that I've been able to do that to some degree of success, and ultimately the reason I've done that and I push for that is because I want to help people. I want to help patients. I want to make them feel better. And so I think that's probably something I'm fairly proud of from a standpoint of what I'm doing in medicine.
Perfect. Well, Jason, I think, again, we shared amazing insights on how to learn CTO and complex PCI. Thank you so much. You've done a phenomenal work in teaching many people, both inside and outside your institution. But if you had to summarize it in a couple, 3 final tips and tricks for the, people who are trying to get into that area, what would those be?
Don't give up. Be stubborn. Be persistent. Have the courage to fail. Have the courage to learn from others. And always strive to get better at what you do every day, but never lose sight of what the ultimate goal is, and that's helping patients and helping them to feel better.
Well, thanks again, Jason. Really appreciate it. I think all our listeners and viewers would learn a lot by attending to this. So thanks so much for everything. Look forward to working with you again shortly.
All right. Sounds great, Manos. Thank you so much for having me. Glad to share my experiences with you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Sensei podcast.